Elliott Abrams, former Deputy National Security Advisor for the Middle East to President George W. Bush. So what do you think, Elliott? A meeting between the presidents is now a good time?
Not really. I mean, all we have from the Iranians is some fancy words so far. The tone has changed, but they haven't actually done anything. And remember, Rouhani is not President Obama's equal. The Ayatollah Khamenei is the guy who's running things, the supreme leader. So they're not really equals.
That's a good point. We want to apply what we know from our own politics to the word president in other countries. Right. It's not always the case. I was taking a look at Rouhani's editorial, and this is just one part of it. He says the international community faces many challenges in this new world: terrorism, extremism, foreign military interference, drug trafficking, cybercrime, and cultural encroachment. How many of these things is Iran guilty of themselves?
Good question. Every one of them, starting with terrorism. The U.S. government says Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world.
And that holds true today, right? So if the president was to meet with the president of Iran, it would be knowingly meeting with one leader in a country that we've designated as a state sponsor of terror.
That's exactly right. And this is a country that's killed lots of Americans. This is a country that has troops right now in Syria fighting on behalf of the Assad regime. We tend to sort of push that aside as we focus on the nuclear issue.
How do you think our actions in Syria and what's happening there are impacting this editorial, what we might see next week, and the way forward with Iran?
Well, I think it weakens our position, and that's a really unfortunate thing. We want to negotiate a deal that gets rid of Iran's nuclear weapons. The only way they're going to do that, they don't want to get rid of their nuclear weapons program. They want to get nuclear weapons, so they need to be under pressure. The pressure's off because of Syria. There's no credible military option now. People think that President Obama blinked on Syria, and if he blinked on Syria, he's certainly going to blink on Iran. So this is a moment when the Iranians may feel they can go into negotiations and get a lot from us because we will be in a weak position. That's my fear, that we're going to do a deal that actually lets the Iranians continue with their nuclear program, and that's what we need to avoid.
It's interesting the president has used the word weaponization of nuclear power when it comes to Iran. That's not what he wants to see, but that's a very key term. Saying weaponization of nuclear power is not what we'd accept, but other things. Why is that? Why do we need to pay attention to the words there?
Well, for one thing, we need to know whether we're going to permit them to get a nuclear weapons capability, so they'll just be kind of one turn of the screw away from getting a nuclear weapon. We need to get them to back far away from a nuclear weapons program. No more spinning of centrifuges, no more modernizing centrifuges, adding new ones, no more enriching uranium. We could envision such a deal, but the question is whether Iran is really willing, despite these fancy words in the Washington Post, whether Iran is really willing to do that kind of deal or thinks they can take advantage of us now.
You know, when you take a look at the world's problems, it would be great if we could just snap our fingers and have it all disappear. And Iran is an example of that. We've done so many segments over the years. I know you've talked about it, Elliott, quite a bit, about how to deal with Iran. In an ideal situations where negotiations could work, what would that even look like to us? What would successful negotiations be at this point?
A successful negotiation would be one in which, in exchange for our slowly but steadily removing the sanctions, Iran would give up its search for a nuclear weapon. So it would stop enriching uranium, stop adding centrifuges, stop trying to go the other route, which is the plutonium route, stop experimenting with building warheads, so that they would be further away from a nuclear weapon instead of getting closer and closer and closer every month. The problem is we just did a deal with Russia on Syria that's a mess. You know, we did the deal. It's already unraveling. It looks like it can't be implemented. Our leverage is reduced because we blinked at the moment of using military force.
I only have 30 seconds here, but what would it be in it for Iran to do that now anyways? I mean, what kind of leverage do we have to even get half of the list that you just mentioned?
The only leverage we have right now, sanctions. And we ought to keep the sanctions. We ought to try to increase the sanctions because they are hurting the Iranian economy. That's our leverage.
Interesting, because we're seeing some of the force from those sanctions. People lift their foot from the pedal a little bit on it as they start to see some movements in Iran. We'll keep an eye on the story, Elliott. Great to see you as always.